The first test mortar hit my chest before it hit the sky. Whomp! A blunt pressure that turned every rib into a drum. A white bloom flashed above the town square, and the air filled with that sharp, dry smell of burned powder that people called festive because they didn't have another word for it. I tasted metal anyway. Around me, strangers cheered like the sound had been made for them alone. Coats brushed, plastic cups clinked. Someone's scarf slapped my shoulder in the wind. The stage lights washed the faces in front of me a warm gold, softening their edges the way my family always tried to soften hard things until they broke. I didn't cheer. I stood with my hands in my pockets, fingers closed around nothing, and watched the sky, as if it might suddenly require a report. The town had dressed the square like it was trying to seduce the year into behaving. Strings of bulbs looped between lampposts. Vendors sold cinnamon pretzels and hot chocolate. A kid waved a sparkler that spit tiny orange stars into the cold. The smell of sugar and smoke mixed in the air, sweet and bitter, a combination that always made my stomach tighten. To everyone else, it was joy. To me, it was light pretending it didn't have a shadow. A countdown clock glowed on the main screen above the stage, numbers so large they felt like an order. 0341. People pointed their phones at it as if recording time made it more real. Behind the stage, I could see the fireworks racks on the far hill, dark silhouettes against darker trees. Even from here, I knew the angles were wrong for wind, not dangerously wrong, not enough to cancel. Just enough that any tech worth paying would be watching the drift. I knew because that kind of watching had lived in my bones for years. "Lena!" a voice called from my left. My Uncle Carlos pushed through the crowd with 2 paper cups of coffee, his cheeks red from cold and excitement. He wore a new wool coat and the eager look of someone who believed big moments could wash everything clean. He lifted 1 cup like an offering. "Here, warm." I took it because refusing would become a conversation, and I didn't have energy for conversations tonight. The cup burned my fingers through the cardboard sleeve, and the bitterness hit my tongue like a small slap. Carlos smiled like I'd just agreed to be normal. "See, not so bad." I kept my eyes on the hill. "It's loud." 3 words. Neutral. He laughed. "It's New Year's. Loud is the point." 8 words, cheerful enough to be harmless. I nodded once and didn't tell him that loud was never just loud for me. Loud was a language, loud was a warning. Carlos leaned closer, lowering his voice as if he was sharing a secret instead of avoiding discomfort. "Your mom said you almost didn't come." 6 words. "I came," I said. 2 words. He patted my shoulder quickly the way people touch soldiers when they wanted to claim a little of their steadiness. "Good. We need you smiling tonight." 6 words. Need, smiling, tonight. I looked at him then. Really looked. His eyes were kind. His fear was too. He wasn't cruel like an insult. He was cruel like a blanket thrown over a fire. "I'm fine," I lied because it was easier than explaining the truth. That I could stand in a firefight calmer than I could stand under fireworks. Carlos's smile returned, relieved. "That's my girl." 3 words. Possessive, affectionate, wrong. I wasn't his girl. I was Chief Warrant Officer Lena Morales, Army EOD, and in my head, I was already counting safe distances, angles, fallout zones. I was already listening for the wrong pop. A second test mortar fired. Another chest thump. Another white flare. And the crowd roared as if the sky had done a trick on command. My coffee trembled in my hand. A thin, dark ring sloshed against the lid. I didn't spill. I didn't flinch. I just felt my body go alert the way it always did when sound became pressure. The host on stage bounced on his toes, microphone in hand, feeding the crowd like it was one hungry animal. "Townsville," he shouted. "Are you ready?" A wave of screams answered him. Someone behind me yelled, "Let's go!" like the year was a football game. The host grinned wide, bright teeth under stage light. "We made it," he continued. "Another year in the books." People cheered harder. A woman next to me wiped tears with the back of her mitten. A man lifted his child onto his shoulders so the kid could see the screen. Phones rose like a field of glowing hands. I watched the phones more than the faces. Light. Everywhere. Carlos nudged me with his elbow. You're not counting down? 4 words, trying to be playful. I shook my head once. Not my thing. 3 words. He frowned, then recovered quickly. Come on, it's tradition. In 3 words that always meant, join us. Don't make us feel weird. I kept my gaze forward. I'll watch. 2 words. He sighed, but he didn't push. Carlos was a man who loved comfort more than control. He wanted the world to feel smooth under his feet. Behind him, I saw my mother near the hot chocolate stand, wrapped in a scarf that swallowed her neck. She watched me with that worried, careful expression she wore when she thought I might break the family's peace just by existing. She caught my eye and lifted her hand in a tiny wave. The gesture was so small it hurt. I lifted my coffee cup a fraction in return. Not a toast, just proof I was still there. The host raised both arms theatrically. Tonight, he shouted, we celebrate everything we survived. The crowd exploded with approval. I heard the sentence as if it was being spoken in another language, one I understood too well. In my head, my answer arrived clean and quiet, with no drama to soften it. Some of us didn't. I didn't say it out loud. I let it sit behind my ribs like a held breath. A gust of wind pushed across the square, carrying the smell of fireworks, sulfur and paper and faint gasoline from the hill. It curled into my throat and pulled memory with it. Not hero memory, not cinematic memory, just details. A dark road, a short radio call, a routine sweep that turned wrong. 4 years earlier, I'd been part of a team that moved like a single organism. 6 men and women whose voices I could identify through static, whose footsteps I could recognize in gravel. We'd done our jobs the way you did any dangerous job, with discipline, humor, and the quiet agreement that you didn't need to talk about fear for it to exist. Then the chain detonation happened. Not one blast, many, stacked too close, triggered faster than any human could react. The kind of failure that made you realize training was just a plan until physics arrived. I hadn't been there for the first shockwave because I'd swapped shifts at the last minute. A stupid reason, a simple reason. A phone call about paperwork, a sergeant needing me to sign off on a manifest. I'd complained, then agreed, then walked away from the line of vehicles that later became smoke and silence. That was what survival guilt felt like, nothing dramatic. Just the knowledge that your absence had no meaning, and yet it meant everything. The crowd around me laughed at something the host said. Someone bumped my elbow and apologized without looking. A child tugged at his mother's sleeve, begging for another sparkler. I watched the kid's sparkler burn down to a glowing wire. When it went out, he looked confused, as if darkness wasn't supposed to happen during celebration. I knew that look. Carlos checked his phone and smiled. 2 minutes, he said. 2 words, excited. I didn't answer. In my pocket, my fingers curled tighter, not around a talisman, not around a coin, around the edge of an old habit. Counting. Not time. People. I looked toward the hill again. The racks sat in patient rows. The techs were invisible from here, but I could imagine them. Gloves, lighters, headsets, the nervous calm of men and women who didn't want mistakes attached to their names. I respected them. Fireworks were controlled explosives. A celebration made of careful risk. It was honest, in a way. What wasn't honest was how easily everyone called it pretty and forgot the word explosive was still inside it. The host's voice boomed again. Get your drinks up, he shouted. Cups rose, bottles rose, hands rose with phones, light screens glowing brighter as the countdown clock shifted to 0001 Osarukwa. Carlos lifted his coffee. To the new year. 4 words. I lifted mine because refusing would become a lesson I didn't want to teach tonight. The hot lid pressed my lips when I took a small sip. The bitterness grounded me. Bitter was real. A woman behind us shouted, "We made it!" And her friends screamed back in agreement. The phrase rolled through the crowd like a chant, as if survival was a shared prize. I didn't correct them. I just stared at the empty space in my mind where 6 voices should have been. The host began the final countdown early because crowds loved being led. 30, he yelled. 29, the crowd answered, loud and ragged. I didn't join. Their voices rose into the cold night, merging into one animal sound, and I felt my skin prickle as if sound could become touch. 20, the host shouted. 19, the crowd roared. Someone bumped into me hard enough that my coffee sloshed. A drop hit my glove, hot and sticky. I didn't react. I wiped it against my coat seam. 10, the host screamed. The crowd surged tighter, bodies pressing together for warmth and shared excitement. Someone's perfume, sweet and heavy, mixed with gunpowder smell, and the combination made my stomach twist. 9, 8. Carlos looked at me, smiling, trying to pull me into the current. Come on, he mouthed. I gave him a small nod that meant I'm here, even if I wasn't chanting. 7, 6. The fireworks hill waited. 5. My jaw clenched without permission. 4. I heard it. The tiny, wrong sound buried under the roar. Not a boom. Not a crack. A thin, sharp hiss that didn't match the rhythm. My eyes snapped toward the hill. The racks were too far to see detail, but my body knew. My body always knew when a fuse didn't behave. 3! The crowd screamed harder. 2! My heart beat once, slow and heavy. 1! The world inhaled. And then the first main salvo launched. Multiple mortars in sequence. Whump, whump, whump. Shockwaves pushing the cold air in waves over the square. The sky erupted into color, bright enough to make people's faces glow. Kids shrieked. Adults threw their arms up like the light was something you could catch. I didn't look at the colors. I looked at the timing. I looked at the gaps. Because in the pattern of light, I could always see the dark places where something should have been. The crowd kept yelling Happy New Year and hugging and kissing, and for a moment their joy felt like a wall I couldn't climb. My phone vibrated in my pocket, short, urgent. Carlos didn't notice. He was cheering now, turned toward the sky, his face lit by bursts of green and gold. I slid my hand into my pocket and checked the screen without changing my expression. A text from my mother. Where are you standing? You look pale. I almost laughed. She could see my face even in a crowd. She always could. Fear sharpened attention. I didn't reply. Because another sound cut through the fireworks, closer, wronger, like an unlit fuse deciding whether it wanted to become a problem. I lifted my eyes to the hill again, and in the burst of light, I saw one launch tube stutter just a fraction before firing late. My breath caught. Not panic. Recognition. In my mind, 6 names lined up like an empty formation, waiting for me to remember them properly. And the sky kept exploding like it had never hurt anyone. The late launch made a different sound, thin, delayed, like a breath taken after the lungs had already decided to stop. I kept my face still while the sky bloomed gold. People around me screamed and hugged and lifted their phones higher, chasing light like it could erase whatever the year had taken. The square smelled of cinnamon and burned powder, sweet and sharp, and every whump hit my sternum with the same blunt certainty. I didn't watch the colors. I watched the spacing. Because spacing was how you stayed alive. When a sequence ran clean, the crowd heard music. When a sequence stuttered, I heard the world's old language, risk, not fear, not drama, just math with consequences. Carlos shouted something beside me. Look at that! And his face lit up white-blue with each burst. My mother was somewhere behind him, probably trying to smile hard enough to make me smile too. I couldn't. The light above us kept arriving in waves. Between each wave was a tiny pocket of darkness, a heartbeat-sized pause the crowd didn't notice. They filled every pause with noise. I filled it with names. 4 years earlier, names lived on the radio more than they lived in my mouth. We had been a small EOD team attached to a route clearance element. 6 of them. Me as the warrant who made sure the work stayed disciplined when boredom tried to make it sloppy. People imagined EOD as cinematic wire cutting. It wasn't. It was long hours of sun on gravel, the smell of dust baked into fabric, and the quiet grind of procedures that only mattered when they saved you. The day the chain detonation happened, the air had been dry enough to crack lips. Heat shimmered above the road, bending the world at the horizon. The convoy moved slow. Someone on the radio joked about coffee back home. Someone laughed. Someone told them to shut up. Normal. Then the first blast didn't sound like fireworks. It sounded like the ground deciding it hated us. A deep crack, followed by pressure that punched the lungs and made every thought go white. The shockwave hit the vehicles, hit the people, hit the air itself. Sand jumped in small fountains. Somewhere, metal screamed. And then came the second, and the third. A chain reaction, stacked too close, triggered faster than training could catch. When explosives were set to speak to each other, they didn't care what you had planned. The radio filled with voices that weren't voices anymore. Half words, broken call signs, breath, and panic. Then, abruptly, a different sound took over. Silence, not peaceful silence, the kind that happened when sound got eaten by distance and your mind couldn't decide what belonged to reality. I hadn't been in the kill zone. That was the part that never felt like a gift. I was standing by a supply cage near the staging area, arguing with a clerk about a signature. The air smelled like hot plastic and diesel. My pen clicked in my hand. A runner came sprinting, face pale, shouting my name like it was an emergency signal. Morales! One word, then another. Now! I ran, boots on gravel, breath burning, sun glaring so hard it made the world look clean, like nothing bad could happen in such bright light. When I reached the edge of the scene, the light turned ugly. A column of smoke climbed into the sky, thick and gray. Heat rolled off the road in waves. The vehicles looked wrong, angles broken, doors peeled, tires shredded. The air smelled like burned rubber and something metallic that lodged in the back of the throat. I didn't see bodies first, I saw gloves. A medic's gloves lying on the ground, fingers curled as if still trying to hold pressure. I dropped to my knees beside them before I realized what I was doing, the gravel biting through fabric. My brain tried to assemble a checklist because checklists were how you stayed functional when your heart wanted to leave your chest. Then I heard it. One faint, thin beep from a damaged monitor somewhere, struggling to be a heartbeat in a field of ruin. That beep stopped. I had swapped shifts at the last minute. Paperwork, a manifest, a signature that could have waited. That was the math of it. That was the cruelty of it. There was no cosmic reason I lived. There was no meaning in my absence, except the meaning my grief kept trying to assign. In the weeks after, people told me, "You're lucky." They said it like it was a blessing. It didn't feel like one. It felt like being left behind on purpose. Mini turn. At the memorial, the chapel lights were too bright. White, unforgiving light that showed every tear on every cheek. Rows of chairs sat perfectly aligned because order was what the army offered when chaos had no apology. 6 photos on easels, 6 flags folded into triangles, 6 names read out in calm voices that didn't crack. My own hands stayed still in my lap. My nails dug into my palms until I could feel pain. Small, controlled pain, because uncontrolled pain was worse. A colonel pulled me aside afterward. His breath smelled like coffee and grief. "You did what you could," he said. I nodded because nodding was what you did when you couldn't explain the truth. I hadn't done anything. I had been elsewhere. I had been spared by paperwork. That night in my bunk, the lights were off, but my mind stayed lit. Flashes of smoke, flashes of metal, flashes of gloves on gravel. I stared at the ceiling until dawn, counting nothing because counting made it real. From that point on, fireworks stopped being pretty. They became reminders. Every celebration that used controlled explosions to symbolize joy felt like the world borrowing a language it didn't respect. Back home, my family treated my return like a reset button. Like time could be rewound if we ate enough food together and took enough photos. Carlos, always chasing smoothness, brought me to a 4th of July show the first year I was back. "It'll be good for you," he said, handing me a soda. I stared at the first launch as it thumped my chest and watched him smile. I didn't smile back. My mother sat next to me on a picnic blanket, her hands wrapped around a thermos. The night air smelled like grass and barbecue smoke. The fireworks made kids shriek with happiness. My mother leaned close, voice soft. "See? It's just light." 4 words. Just light. As if light had never come with pressure. As if light had never arrived after a blast to show you what was left. I swallowed and kept my eyes on the sky. It's not just light. 4 words. She frowned, confused, hurt. You have to live, she said. 4 words. I did live. That was the problem. The months turned into years, and the distance between what my family believed and what I carried stayed wide. They thought grief was something you either got over or stayed stuck in. They didn't understand the third option. You learn to carry it without turning it into spectacle. So I didn't talk about it. I worked. I stayed in EOD. I trained. I taught. I reviewed procedures like my life depended on them, because other people's lives did. I learned to look at wires and soil and angles and see the invisible. My family saw only the uniform and the word explosives and translated it into danger they couldn't control. You should do something safer, my mother said one Sunday, chopping garlic at the counter. The kitchen light was warm and the smell of soy sauce filled the air. I am safe, I said. 3 words. Carlos overheard and laughed lightly, trying to smooth it. She's tough, he said. 2 words, a compliment shaped like a dismissal. Then he added, but you can be tough and happy. 6 words. Happy. Like it was a skill you could practice the way you practiced disarming a device. I didn't argue. Arguing only made them dig into comfort harder. I just kept my life quiet enough to fit their table. That quiet became its own kind of wound, because quiet made it easier for them to treat my triggers like moods. Easier to say, it's just fireworks. Easier to say, you're too serious. Easier to say, it's time. Time didn't fix it. Time just gave you more opportunities to be misunderstood. Mini turn. On the drive home from the square that night, after tonight's New Year fireworks, the car smelled like stale coffee and cold air. Carlos kept the radio on a little too loud, trying to fill the silence between us. Wasn't that incredible? He asked, eyes on the road. I watched the streetlights pass in steady intervals, light and dark, light and dark. It was a good show, I said. 4 words. Neutral. He sighed, relieved. See, you can enjoy. 5 words. I didn't correct him. I let him believe it, because correcting him would mean explaining the truth. I hadn't been enjoying. I had been enduring. When we reached my mother's house, she hugged me at the door, her hands warm against my coat. Next year, she said softly, you'll count down. 4 words. I held her for a beat, then stepped back. Maybe, I lied. 1 word, a gift to her. In my room that night, I lay on top of the blanket fully dressed, the house quiet except for the distant echo of celebrations fading. The ceiling light was off. My phone screen lit the darkness each time a message came in. Friends sending fireworks emojis, cousins posting videos, strangers cheering. Light in the dark. Every notification felt like a little flare. I put the phone face down, and in the silence I heard something else, the thing I always heard when crowds went home and the sky went dark. The missing. 6 voices that should have been getting older with me. 6 lives paused in the same year. Forever. I didn't cry. I didn't pray. I just lay there with my eyes open, letting silence do what it always did. Remind me that I was still responsible for remembering. The next morning, Carlos knocked on my door with his business voice already on, cheerful and determined. We need to talk about the fireworks, he said. 6 words. I sat up slowly, feeling the cold of the room against my skin. Talk, I said. 1 word. He stepped in holding a folder, contracts, permits, sponsorship documents, paper that smelled like ink and ambition. The city wants us to sponsor next year, he said, smiling. Big visibility. 7 words. I stared at the folder like it was an unlit fuse. Carlos's smile didn't waver. No politics, he added quickly. No memorial stuff. Just light. 9 words, just light. My fingers curled once at my side. I looked at the folder again, at the clean paper that believed it could control meaning, and in my head I heard the skies stutter from last night. 1 late launch, 1 wrong gap. Like a warning that light always carried memory whether people wanted it or not. I nodded once, slow. Okay, I said. One word. Carlos exhaled, relieved because he heard agreement. He didn't hear the other part I didn't say out loud yet. I would give them light, but the sky would remember. Carlos laid the folder open on my bed like it was a gift. The pages crisp and bright under the morning light. The paper smelled faintly of fresh ink, clean, confident, like it believed nothing bad could ever happen under its signatures. City's excited, he said, tapping a paragraph with his fingertip. Prime sponsor. Logo on everything. He said logo the way some people said prayer. I sat on the edge of the mattress, still in yesterday's clothes, knees stiff from sleeping wrong. Outside my window, the neighborhood was quiet. Trash trucks far off, a dog barking once. Normal sounds that didn't thump your chest the way fireworks did. I scanned the contract without rushing. My eyes moved the way they did over wiring diagrams, not looking for what was obvious, looking for what was hidden. Carlos's finger landed on a bolded line, no political or memorial messaging. See, he said, relieved. They want it simple, no controversy. No controversy, no discomfort, no remembering. I held the page steady. Define memorial. 2 words neutral. Carlos laughed like I was being cute. Come on, no flags, no speeches, no, you know. He didn't say dead. He didn't say loss. He didn't say names. He said, because avoiding language was his specialty. I looked up at him. His cheeks still held the excitement from last night's show. His eyes were bright with the belief that visibility solved everything. I know, I said. 2 words. Carlos's shoulders loosened. He took my agreement like a win. Good, we'll do it right. He leaned closer, lowering his voice like this was between family. Your mom loves that we're involved. She thinks it'll help you. Help you? As if a celebration could patch the missing. I didn't argue. Arguing would turn into a lesson, and lessons were what people demanded when they wanted you to change for their comfort. I flipped another page. Permits? Insurance? Safety distances? Fire department approvals? The city had done its homework. Then another line caught my attention, tucked into a clause about creative direction, Sequence, subject to city review. My thumb paused on the edge of the page. City review, I repeated. 2 words. Carlos nodded. Standard, they approve the show list, but the pyro guys handle the rest. Pyro guys, like it was just a hobby. I traced the margin lightly, feeling the paper grain under my fingertip. Who's the vendor? Carlos's smile widened. Skybright Pyrotechnics, best in the county. He said it with pride, like good fireworks were the same thing as good ethics. I closed the folder slowly. When's the meeting? 2 words. Carlos's relief turned into enthusiasm again. Today, City Hall, 1500. You'll come. Your title helps. My title. Chief Warrant Officer. EOD. My rank was useful to them when it made their choices look responsible. I nodded once. I'll come. 3 words. Carlos clapped his hands once. Great. Wear something nice. 3 words. He left the room humming, already imagining banners and grateful handshakes. The door clicked shut behind him, and the house fell into quiet again. I stared at the closed folder. Paper had rules. Paper had language. Paper believed it could control meaning. It couldn't. Meaning always leaked through the cracks. I picked the folder up and carried it to the kitchen table where my mother sat with her tea. Steam curled above the cup, catching the sunlight in soft threads. She looked tired but hopeful. Hopeful the way she got when she thought family could be fixed by a single wholesome event. Carlos says you're sponsoring, she said. 4 words. A smile trying hard. I sat across from her. The chair's wood was cool under my hands. Yes. 1 word. Her eyes softened. Maybe you'll feel lighter. 4 words. Cautious. I watched her fingers around the tea mug. Steady, domestic, built for peace. It's just light, I said, borrowing her phrase back. 4 words. She nodded quickly, relieved. Yes, just light. 2 words, then 2. I held her gaze. And darkness. 2 words. Her smile faltered. Lena, 1 word. Warning. I didn't push. I lowered my eyes to the folder again. I'll handle it. 3 words. That was what I always said. That was what I always did. Mini turn. At City Hall, the lobby smelled like floor wax and old coffee. Fluorescent lights flattened everyone's faces into the same tired color. A plastic Christmas tree still stood near the information desk, half-deflated tinsel hanging like it had given up on cheer. Carlos walked ahead of me, shaking hands with people who wore name badges and practiced smiles. I followed with the folder tucked under my arm, my boots quiet on tile. We entered a small conference room with a long table, a pitcher of water, and a framed photo of the town square in summer, sunlit, innocent, pretending winter didn't exist. The city manager sat at the head with a legal pad. The fire marshal leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. A woman from Parks and Rec flipped through a binder. 2 men in branded jackets, sky bright, sat on the far side, their hands clean, their fingernails short. The vendor rep stood when we entered. Mr. Morales, he said warmly. Great to finally meet. They shook hands. Carlos beamed. Then the rep turned to me, eyes flicking to my posture, my calm. And you must be Chief Morales. He meant it as respect. He got it wrong anyway. Morales is my uncle, I said. I'm Lena. 8 words total, but quiet. He blinked. Lena, great. We hear you have a military background. 6 words, the way civilians said it when they didn't want to say war. I'm EOD, I replied. 3 words. The room shifted a fraction. The fire marshal's eyebrows lifted. The parks woman stopped flipping pages for a beat. People respected explosives the way they respected snakes. From a distance. Carlos jumped in quickly. She's here to ensure safety, he said. 6 words. A translation that made me less complicated. I didn't correct him. The city manager smiled politely. We're grateful for your sponsorship, she said. This show means a lot to people. 9 words. I looked at the framed summer photo and imagined the same square filled with winter breath and raised phones. People like light, I said. 3 words. The Skybright rep nodded eagerly. Absolutely, we've designed a high-impact sequence. Big shells, synchronized timing, a finale that... He spread his hands like he was describing art. The fire marshal cleared his throat. Safety first, he said. 2 words, then 1. The Skybright rep nodded too fast. Of course. 1 word. The city manager slid a page toward Carlos. There's one condition we need to be clear about, she said, tapping the bolded line. No political or memorial elements. 8 words. Carlos nodded immediately. Agreed, just a celebration. 5 words. The city manager's eyes moved to me as if checking whether the soldier in the room would make things awkward. Chief Warrant Officer Morales, she said carefully, we appreciate your service. We just want to keep the night unified. 4 words that meant, don't bring grief into it. Unified was the word people used when they wanted silence without admitting it. I nodded once, understood. 1 word. The Skybright rep relaxed. Great, he said brightly. We'll keep it neutral. 4 words, neutral. In EOD, neutral meant safe. In grief, neutral meant avoidance. Carlos slid the contract toward me with a pen. You signed too, he whispered. For oversight. Oversight. Liability. Respectability. I took the pen. It felt light in my hand, too light for what it was about to authorize. I signed where Carlos indicated, my name clean and calm, Lena Morales. The ink dried fast. The city manager smiled. Wonderful. Sequence review will happen in October, she said. We'll approve the cue list and music sync. 17 words, bureaucratic and cheerful. I held my face still. Cue list, I repeated. 2 words, the Skybright rep nodded. We submit a show sheet. Times, heights, effects. 8 words. And the code? I asked. 3 words. The rep blinked. Code? 1 word. I kept my tone neutral. Firing program, sequence logic. 4 words. The fire marshal leaned forward slightly, interested now. You write code for fireworks? 6 words. Carlos chuckled. She writes code for bombs, he said, too loud. 6 words. A joke. No one laughed. The Skybright rep cleared his throat. We have proprietary software, he said. We load sequences. It's standard. 9 words. I nodded once as if satisfied. Inside me, a thought formed clean and quiet. Show sheets were not code. Show sheets described outcomes. Code controlled them. People who didn't live with explosives never understood where control actually lived. Mini turn. After the meeting, Carlos walked me back through the lobby, still buoyant. See? Easy. No drama. It's going to be beautiful. 10 words. Outside, the air was cold enough to sting my nostrils, the smell of exhaust mixed with winter air. Carlos unlocked his car and leaned on the door. You did good, he said, smiling. You didn't bring heavy stuff. The 10 words, and he looked proud, like he'd trained me. I stared at the city hall steps. Heavy stuff doesn't stay away, I said. 6 words. Carlos's smile dimmed. Lena, he warned softly, don't turn this into a statement. 10 words. I looked at him. I'm not. 2 words. He exhaled, relieved again. Good, because the town needs joy. 6 words. Needs, like joy was oxygen. I didn't argue, I just said, I'll handle the details. 5 words. Carlos nodded, satisfied, and drove off. I stood alone for a moment on the sidewalk, listening to the distant traffic hiss. The winter sun sat low, pale light that didn't warm anything. The town moved on with its errands and lunch plans, and I felt the familiar split. Their calendar versus my memory. On my way back to my car, my phone buzzed. A message from a number I still had saved, even though it hadn't changed in years. MIA's mom. The text was short. Saw the fireworks last night. Thank you for remembering. I stared at the words until the screen dimmed. Thank you for remembering. Not thank you for serving. Not thank you for protecting us. Just that. Remembering. Like it was work. Like it mattered. I slipped the phone into my pocket and drove home with the heater blowing lukewarm air, hands steady on the wheel. At the house, my mother was in the kitchen again, chopping scallions. The smell of sesame oil filled the room, warm and familiar. Carlos's folder sat on the table, open to the page with the big, bold line, No Memorial. My mother glanced up. How was it? 3 words. Fine, I said. 1 word. She smiled. See? Easy. 2 words. I nodded once and carried the folder to my room. I closed the door. In my closet, behind hanging coats, a small hard case sat on the floor. Inside were things I didn't show family. Old unit patches, a dog tag chain that wasn't mine, a folded photo with edges worn soft. I didn't take them out. I didn't need to. I sat at my desk and opened my laptop. The screen lit my hands pale blue. Light. I pulled up a blank document and typed 6 names at the top, 1 per line. No ranks, no decorations. Just names the way I said them in my head when the world got loud. Then I opened a second file, an old training workbook, a personal archive of timing diagrams and sequence patterns I'd built for teaching. Not fireworks, procedures, cadence, spacing, how you made controlled energy behave. I stared at the empty grid and felt the decision settle in me like a fuse being cut clean. I wouldn't add flags. I wouldn't add speeches. I wouldn't turn grief into spectacle. But I could embed remembrance where the city couldn't ban it. Inside light itself. Inside the pauses. Inside the rhythm. No words, no symbols, just pattern, just silence shaped by light. I began sketching a sequence, heights, intervals, a deliberate gap where the crowd would expect a boom and instead receive a slow fall of sparks, like a formation missing its center. The contract said no memorial. The contract didn't own the sky. When the first line of code appeared on my screen, my fingers hesitated, just a fraction, like they could feel the weight of what I was about to do. Then I typed again. Steady. Outside my window, the winter light faded, and the room filled with the quiet hum of my laptop fan. Soft, constant, like a countdown that only I could hear. My laptop fan whined softly in the dark, a steady little turbine that sounded too much like a distant rotor when the house was quiet. The only light in my room came from the screen, cold blue on my hands, harsh enough to make every vein look like a map. Outside, winter wind tapped the window once, impatient. I stared at the grid I'd drawn. Heights, intervals, delays. Not pretty words, not speeches. Just timing. I kept the 6 names at the top of the document like a header I refused to delete. No ranks, no medals. I didn't need decorations to remember who had stood where. I built the first sequence the way I built any safe outcome, backward from the worst case. I asked myself what the crowd would expect. Boom, bloom, boom. And then I designed the gap. Not a dead tube, not a malfunction. A deliberate pocket of dark where the sky would pause like it was listening. After that, a slow fall of sparks, soft, drifting, like a formation dissolving without violence, light. Then silence. The contract said no memorial, but it didn't say the sky couldn't breathe. I labeled the sequences with harmless names that would slide past any review committee. Aurora 1, Cascade 2, Skyline 3, Ember 4, Night Rain 5, Last Star 6, Neutral, Marketable, Safe. Under those names, I assigned the truth in numbers. The first pattern held a high burst followed by a 3-count pause. The second held a staggered rise, 2 quick shots, 1 delayed, like someone missing their step but the unit still moving forward. The third was low and wide, hugging the horizon, because one of them had always walked with his head down, watching the ground like it was talking. I wasn't building art. I was building a language only the body understood. A heartbeat wasn't a speech. It was rhythm. Presence, absence, presence. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the fabric press against my shoulders, and I let the quiet settle behind my ribs. In the hallway, I heard my mother's soft footsteps pass my door and stop. "Lena," she called gently. One word. Careful. I didn't close the laptop. I just angled the screen slightly, enough that the names disappeared from the doorway line of sight. "Yes?" I answered. "One word." Her voice came through the door, thin with worry. "You're working?" 2 words. I kept my tone neutral. "Just reviewing." 2 words. A pause. I imagined her hand hovering near the knob, the way she hovered near conflict like it was a hot stove. "It's late," she whispered. 2 words. "I know," I said. 2 words. She didn't push. She never did. That was her love, quiet, minimizing, hopeful. Her footsteps retreated. When the house fell still again, I exhaled slowly and returned to the grid. Mini turn. My phone buzzed on the desk, one sharp vibration that cut clean through the quiet. Carlos. I stared at the screen until it dimmed, then answered before it could ring again. "Yeah," I said. 1 word. Carlos's voice came in bright and busy. "Vendor wants a site walk tonight." 6 words. "Tonight," I repeated. 1 word. "Yeah," he said, as if the year obeyed his schedule. "They're prepping racks. They want your safety eyes." 14 words, and I heard the grin in his tone. Pride that my rank made his business look responsible. I glanced at my laptop screen. 6 neutral sequence names hiding 6 real memories. What time? 2 words. "Midnight," Carlos said. "Cool, right? Fireworks at night." 6 words. I didn't laugh. "I'll be there." 3 words. Carlos lowered his voice, confidential. "And hey, remember, no meaning." 8 words. He couldn't say memorial. He couldn't say grief. "I remember," I replied. 2 words. He exhaled, relieved. "Good, see you." 3 words. The call ended. The screen went dark. The room went quiet again, but it wasn't the same quiet. It was a quiet with a deadline. I saved the file twice, then copied the sequence sheet into a separate review document. Clean, friendly, full of harmless names and safe descriptions. If the city wanted a show sheet, I would give them one. What they wouldn't get was the code that lived under it. I shut the laptop and stood. The floor felt cold through my socks. The mirror on my closet door caught a sliver of screen glow and threw it back at me like a thin blade of light. I didn't look long. I didn't need to see my face to know what it held. I dressed for work, not for a meeting. Dark jacket, gloves, boots. In the kitchen, my mother had left a bowl covered in foil. The house smelled faintly of sesame oil, comfort she offered even when she didn't understand the war inside my chest. I didn't eat. I just took my keys and stepped into the night. The Skybright warehouse sat at the edge of town where streetlights thinned and the air smelled of wet pavement and distant exhaust. A security floodlight washed the loading bay in hard white glare, turning the world flat and honest. Inside, the air smelled like paper, plastic, and that faint, sharp bite of pyrotechnic compound that never fully left a place where sparks were stored. The sound was mostly silence, just the hum of fluorescent lights and the occasional clink of metal racks being shifted. Carlos waved me in, breath visible. "There she is," he said. 3 words, proud. 2 technicians in branded jackets looked up from a pallet of shells. One of them, thin, tired eyes, nodded toward me with cautious respect. "You the EOD officer?" he asked. 5 words. "I am," I said. 2 words. He handed me a hard hat like that made this less serious. "We're loading tomorrow," he said. "Just want your eyes on layout." 9 words. I put the hard hat on because it was easier than making a point. The plastic strap pressed my forehead. The warehouse light reflected off the brim like a strip of dull armor. We walked between pallets marked with printed labels and taped warnings. The racks were neat, orderly, safe in the way anything could be safe when it hadn't been lit yet. A tech pointed to a row of launch tubes. "Wind was tricky last night," he said. "We'll angle 5 degrees. 9 words. I nodded once. "Good." 1 word. He looked at me like he expected more. Most civilians expected soldiers to either joke or preach. I didn't do either. I just kept moving, scanning angles, imagining trajectories. At the far end of the warehouse, a folding table held a laptop and a small black control unit. The tech's hand brushed it with proprietary pride. "That's the controller," he said. "We program sequences here." 8 words. I kept my voice calm. "I want to see the firing program." 7 words. The tech blinked. "Show sheets enough for review." 6 words. "I'm not the city," I said. 4 words. His jaw tightened. "Company policy." 2 words. I held his gaze without heat. "My policy is nobody dies." 6 words. That landed. Not as threat, as fact. Carlos cleared his throat, trying to keep the room smooth. "She's just being thorough," he said quickly. "You know, military." 9 words, translating my spine into a quirk. The tech hesitated, then unlocked the laptop with a sigh. "Fine," he said, "but don't copy it." 5 words. I didn't smile. "I won't." 2 words. He opened the software, a grid that looked like every grid I'd ever loved. Clean lines, timestamps, channels, delays. The cursor blinked at the top like a heartbeat waiting for input. Light, silence. He scrolled through sequence names. Aurora 1, Cascade 2, Skyline 3, the exact harmless names I'd already chosen. My throat tightened once. Relief, cold and controlled. "You already have these names," I said lightly. 5 words. The tech shrugged. "Marketing suggested them." 3 words. Marketing. As if grief and commerce shared a dictionary. I leaned in slightly, eyes scanning channel assignments. "Who wrote these?" 3 words. The tech rubbed his jaw. "We use templates," he said. "Adjust heights, colors, timing." 9 words. Templates. That was good. Templates were predictable. Predictability was a door. Carlos leaned near my shoulder, whispering, "See? Neutral." 2 words. I nodded once without answering. The tech clicked into the timing layer, and my pulse steadied. The software allowed micro delays, intentional pauses, non-burst effects that read as artistic to civilians and as meaning to anyone who had ever watched a unit move without all its people. I pointed at a setting. Can you do slow fall without report? 7 words. The tech frowned. Like falling sparks? 2 words. Yes, I said. 1 word. He nodded reluctantly. We can run a waterfall effect, he said. No bang, just light. 10 words. Just light. The phrase tried to sting. I didn't let it. Add it, I said. 2 words. He hesitated, then clicked. Where? 1 word. I watched the grid and found the spot I'd already held in my head, a deliberate gap after a bright cluster, then a slow fall that would feel like breath leaving the sky. Right there, I said. 2 words. He adjusted the parameters, muttering, people might think it's a dud. 7 words. I kept my tone flat. They'll learn the difference. 5 words. He glanced at me, uneasy. Difference between what? 3 words. I didn't answer. Some truths didn't need an explanation in a warehouse at midnight. Mini turn. As the tech worked, a second Skybright guy approached from a side aisle carrying a coil of fuses. He stopped short when he saw the open laptop. Hey, he said sharply. We don't show that. 5 words. The first tech raised a hand. Relax. EOD oversight. 3 words. The second tech's eyes narrowed at me. You making changes? 3 words. I kept my voice calm. Safety checks. 2 words. He looked at the screen again and pointed. Waterfall effect? He asked. That's not in the standard finale. 8 words. Carlos stepped in quickly, forced laughter. Artistic touch, he said. Makes it pretty. 4 words. Pretty. The second tech didn't look convinced. City approved list yet? 4 words. October, Carlos answered, too fast. This is internal. 4 words. The second tech's mouth tightened. Internal becomes liability. 3 words. He stared at the waterfall setting like it offended him. Then he said, quieter. Don't get us sued. 4 words. I met his eyes. I'm preventing funerals. 4 words. He flinched just slightly as if the word funerals had pulled the room out of celebration and into reality. He walked away without another word. The first tech exhaled and muttered, military people. 2 words. I didn't correct him. I didn't need his understanding. I needed his access. When he finished adjusting the waterfall effect, he leaned back and wiped his hands on his jeans as if code left residue. There, he said. Slow fall, no report. 6 words. I nodded once and said, now add pauses. 3 words. He frowned. Pauses. 1 word. Micro gaps, I said. Not errors, deliberate. 6 words. He rubbed his jaw again. Why? 1 word. I kept my voice level. Because timing matters. 3 words. It was the closest thing to an explanation he deserved. He sighed, annoyed but compliant, and I watched the cursor move as he inserted tiny pockets of darkness into the show. Each gap was a fraction of a second on paper and a full inhale in a crowd. The tech saved the file. Done, he said. 1 word. Carlos clapped lightly, relieved. Perfect. Beautiful. 2 words. I watched the saved timestamp appear in the corner. The code had changed. The sky, next year, would breathe differently. On the hill outside town, the racks waited like dark ribs against the night. The wind smelled of pine and distant smoke. A security floodlight threw a cone of white over the setup area, making the grass look pale and dead. The techs moved around the racks with headlamps and gloves, their breath visible, their motions practiced. I stood back, arms crossed, watching angles, listening to the night. No cheers here. Just work. Carlos stood beside me, hands in pockets. You okay? He asked. 2 words. I kept my eyes on a fuse line. Fine. One word. He nodded, satisfied with the lie. This will be good for you, he said. A clean night. 8 words. Clean. As if light erased everything. I didn't answer. I walked closer to the racks, boots crunching on frozen ground, and watched a tech test an ignition line. The tiny click of a connector sounded loud in the cold. An unlit fuse lay coiled near the base, thin, innocent, full of potential. Unlit. That was always the moment I trusted least, the moment before. I turned back toward the control unit table where the laptop sat open under the floodlight. The screen's glow looked small under the harsh outdoor light, but I could still see my neutral names. Aurora, Cascade, Skyline. Safe words hiding unsafe truth. The first tech glanced up. We'll lock sequence after final review, he said. 8 words. When? I asked. 1 word. Tonight, he said. We're done after upload. 7 words. My pulse stayed steady. I want to watch the upload. 6 words. He shrugged. Sure, not exciting. 3 words. He didn't know. He didn't know this was the part where you either honored your dead or let them disappear into other people's celebration. He clicked through menus. A progress bar appeared, slow, indifferent. I watched the percentage crawl upward, the laptop fan whispering under the wind. Light. Silence. The bar hit 100%. The tech closed the laptop and latched the case. All set, he said. 2 words. I nodded once, but my eyes stayed on the hill, on the racks, on the dark sky above them that would later become a canvas for people who didn't know what they were about to witness. Carlos exhaled, pleased. Great, let's go home. 4 words. I turned with him, walking down the frozen path toward the parking area. The wind bit my cheeks. The town lights flickered far below like scattered embers. Halfway down the hill, a flashlight beam swept across the ground behind us, slow, searching, then lifted. I stopped. Carlos kept walking, then noticed and turned. What? 1 word. The flashlight beam slid up the path and landed on my face, bright and blinding. A voice called from the darkness above, tight and suspicious. Hey, who changed the timing file? The flashlight beam pinned my face like an accusation. Cold, white light cutting through the dark. Hey, who changed the timing file? The voice called again from uphill, tight and suspicious. Wind shoved at my coat. The hill smelled like pine needles and damp soil, and the far-off town lights below flickered like scattered embers that didn't know what they were about to become. Carlos froze beside me, halfway turned, already nervous. He hated conflict the way some people hated heights. I didn't move fast. I didn't flinch. I just lifted my chin slightly toward the beam, letting my eyes narrow against the glare. A tech stepped into view, headlamp strapped tight, breath visible. His boots crunched the frozen ground. He kept the flashlight up like it was a weapon he didn't know how to use. I kept my voice calm. Safety adjustment. 2 words. He scoffed. We don't do that. 4 words. His tone was defensive, not cruel. Carlos jumped in, hands raised like he was trying to smooth air. It was nothing, he said. Just an effect. 6 words. The tech's jaw flexed. It changes the show. 4 words. It stabilizes the wind drift, I said. 6 words. True enough to hold. He took a step down the hill toward us, flashlight still high. You didn't ask. 3 words. I watched the upload, I replied. 4 words, not an apology. He frowned, flashlight dipping a fraction. You're not Skybright. 3 words. I'm the liability, I said. 3 words. That landed. Not because it was dramatic, because everyone in explosives understood liability. Liability had names. Liability had families. Liability had funerals. The tech exhaled hard, breath steaming. City approved list. 3 words. They'll see the show sheet, I said. Not the micro gaps. 10 words. He stared at me as if he hated that I sounded like someone who understood the machinery better than he wanted. His flashlight beam wavered slightly, then steadied again. Carlos tried again. Soft laugh. Come on, man. It's just light. 6 words. just light. Even now, the phrase tried to crawl under my skin. The tech's eyes flicked past me to the racks behind. If something goes wrong, 4 words. I cut in, gentle but firm. It won't. 2 words. He didn't believe promises, neither did I. But I believed procedures. I believed planning. I believed the kind of control you earned by respecting what could happen. He swallowed, then lowered the flashlight fully. The beam slid off my face and onto the ground, suddenly harmless. Don't touch it again. 4 words. I nodded once. I'm done, Sol. 2 words. He hesitated, then muttered, almost embarrassed by his own fear. Fireworks aren't bombs. 3 words. I looked at the racks, tubes waiting to launch controlled violence into beauty. They're cousins, I said. 2 words. He stared, then turned uphill without another word, boots crunching away into the dark. Carlos exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for 10 minutes. You didn't have to be scary. 7 words. I didn't look at him. I wasn't. 2 words. He rubbed his hands together for warmth. I just want it clean. Wait, 6 words. I stared down the hill at the sleeping town. Clean as a story, I said. 4 words. Carlos didn't answer. He didn't like sentences that made him responsible for anything more than contracts. We walked to the cars in silence, the cold biting my cheeks, the hill wind rattling branches overhead like dry bones. I kept seeing the progress bar in my mind, 100%, as if the sky had already agreed to hold my dead. Light. Silence. I drove home with the heater blowing weakly, hands steady on the wheel. The year moved the way years always did, fast in public, slow in my chest. October came with paperwork and cheerful meetings. The city reviewed the show sheet, my neutral names, my harmless descriptions. Nobody asked about microgaps. Nobody asked why one sequence included slow fall sparks without report. They just asked if it would be pretty. December arrived with family dinners where my mother tried to talk about decorations and resolutions like they were tools that could fix anything. Carlos bragged about sponsorship banners. People thanked him for bringing joy. No one thanked the people who had never come home to see the banners. I didn't correct anyone. I didn't give speeches. I did what I always did. I kept the work quiet. On the last week of the year, I went to the hill alone and stood near the racks while techs finished their checks. The air smelled like cold metal and pine sap. My gloves squeaked faintly when I flexed my fingers. The control case sat latched, innocent. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I just stood there long enough to feel the shape of the night coming. Then I left. Because this wasn't about my presence. It was about the sky. New Year's Eve returned like a familiar noise. The town square filled again. Vendors, hot chocolate, cinnamon, laughter layered over loud music. The stage lights washed faces warm. Phones rose like a field of glowing hands. The countdown clock burned bright above the crowd. Carlos stood beside me again, bundled up, cheeks red with excitement. My mother was a few feet behind him, scarf high, eyes scanning me the way she always did when she was afraid of what she couldn't name. The host bounced on stage, microphone booming. "Townsville," he shouted, "we made it!" Screams answered him. Strangers hugged early. Someone popped a cheap party horn near my ear. The sound made my jaw tighten without permission. I didn't count down. I never did. I watched the hill. I watched wind direction. I watched spacing. "Lena," Carlos said, nudging me, "smile tonight." 2 words and 1 instruction. I kept my face neutral. "I'm here." 2 words. He took that as enough. The host raised both arms. "Let's celebrate everything we survived." The crowd roared. Inside me, my answer arrived the same way it always did. Quiet, clean, heavy. Some of us didn't. The clock hit the final minute. Voices rose, bodies pressed closer. The air smelled like perfume and smoke and sugar. A child waved a sparkler. Tiny orange stars spitting into the cold. Light. Silence. My heartbeat stayed steady, slow. The host shouted, 10! The crowd shouted back, ragged and joyful. 9, 8. Carlos looked at me, smiling hard, trying to pull me into the current. I gave him a small nod that meant I won't ruin this for you. 3, 2, 1. The first main salvo launched. Whump, whump, whump. And the shockwave hit my chest like a remembered shove. The sky bloomed green, then gold. The crowd screamed like the light belonged to them. I watched the timing. The first two sequences ran as expected. Bright clusters, clean reports, a rhythmic climb that made the square shake with applause. People shouted Happy New Year over and over like repetition could guarantee safety. Then the third sequence began. Aurora 1, a high burst, clean and white. Then the deliberate pause. No boom, just a breath-sized pocket of dark where the crowd expected noise. At first, people didn't notice. They filled the gap with cheering anyway. But my body noticed. My body had been built to notice gaps. The sky held still for half a second longer than pretty allowed. Then a slow fall began. Thin strands of light drifting down without report. Sparks cascading like soft rain. Not loud, not dramatic, just light descending into silence. The crowd's cheering faltered. It didn't stop all at once. It slowed the way a room slowed when someone entered with bad news. Conversations thinned. Voices dropped. People stared upward, confused. A man near the front, older, knit cap, worn jacket, stopped recording. His phone lowered slowly, as if he suddenly remembered he had hands and hands could be respectful. "What is that?" someone whispered. 3 words. Not mocking, curious. The slow fall sparks continued, drifting down like a formation breaking without chaos, like 6 positions becoming empty in the same instant. My throat tightened, but my posture stayed steady. I didn't look at Carlos. I didn't look at my mother. I looked at the sky and let it do what it needed to do. The next sequence hit. Cascade 2. 2 bright shots, 1 delayed. The delay was small, but the crowd felt it. The rhythm changed. Their bodies noticed before their minds did. Cheering turned into scattered claps. Then into nothing. Silence began to spread. Not commanded silence, not respectful silence yet, just the silence of people sensing they were inside something they hadn't planned. A child asked loudly, "Did it break?" 3 words. No one answered. Near the edge of the square, a man with a veteran cap, army patch faded at the brim, tilted his head, eyes narrowing. He wasn't watching pretty. He was watching pattern. His mouth moved, barely audible. That pattern. 2 words. He swallowed hard, gaze fixed on the slow fall light. That's a fallen formation. 4 words. The sentence didn't travel like a shout. It traveled like gravity. People around him turned. Someone repeated it under their breath. Another person went still. The host on stage opened his mouth to hype the crowd again, then hesitated, sensing the air had changed. Even he didn't know how to cheer over a sky that suddenly felt like a funeral without a coffin. The next sequence rose. Skyline 3, low, wide, hugging the horizon, like hands spread to keep something from dropping. The reports were softer now, spaced differently. The sky seemed to pause between bursts as if it was counting people. My chest hurt, but not like panic. Like recognition. The silence in the square deepened. It stopped being confusion and became attention. Collective, unwilling, honest. Somewhere behind me, I heard my mother's breath hitch. A small sound. A private grief, trying to find language. The sky released another slow fall. Thin sparks drifting down, not exploding, just descending. Light choosing to mourn instead of entertain. And then it happened. Not a cheer, not a gasp. A clap. Single. Measured. Somewhere to my right, the veteran in the cap brought his hands together once. Clap. Then again. Clap. Not applause for a show, a signal of recognition. A woman nearby, maybe someone's mother, maybe someone's wife, joined in slower. Another person followed. The clapping didn't swell into noise, it stayed deliberate, respectful. A slow clap moved through the square like a tide. People didn't know why they were clapping at first. Then they understood enough to keep going. No one spoke. No one laughed. The host lowered his microphone without saying a word. The fireworks continued, light and pause, burst and gap, fall and dark, writing names the town didn't know in a language the body could feel. I stood in the crowd and didn't raise my phone. I didn't raise my hands. I just let my eyes stay on the sky while the slow clap rolled around me steady as a heartbeat. And inside my coat pocket, my fingers curled around nothing. But my mind held 6 names like code that could never be deleted. As the finale approached, Carlos leaned closer, voice trembling with a fear he didn't understand. "Lena," he whispered, "what did you do?" 5 words. I didn't answer, because the sky was still speaking, and I wasn't finished listening. The slow clap stayed with me longer than the fireworks did. It followed me home in the soft hiss of tires on wet asphalt, in the way my hands kept the steering wheel at exactly 10 and 2, in the quiet pressure behind my eyes that never spilled into tears. The heater in my car blew air that smelled faintly of dust, and every streetlight I passed carved the road into alternating pools of light and dark, like the sky had come down to keep teaching the lesson. Behind me, the celebration kept happening for everyone else. People would post videos. People would write captions. People would try to make meaning manageable. I didn't. I walked into my mother's house without turning on extra lamps. The kitchen clock ticked too loud. The living room still smelled like her ginger tea and the perfumed detergent she used on throw blankets. She stood in the hallway in her scarf, cheeks flushed from cold, eyes searching my face. Carlos came in behind me, still shaken, his excitement replaced by a tight, nervous energy that made his hands move too much. "What did you do?" he asked again. 5 words, softer than before. I took my boots off carefully at the door, the way I always did, as if control over small things could keep larger things from spilling. "I changed timing," I said. 3 words. Carlos stared. "You turned it into something." 5 words, afraid to say memorial. My mother's voice was small. "Lena." 1 word, a warning that was really a plea. I hung my coat on the hook, fabric brushing my knuckles. "I didn't add words," I said. 5 words. Carlos ran a hand over his face. "You don't need words," he snapped, then immediately lowered his tone like he'd surprised himself. The town went quiet. 10 words. My mother pressed her palm to her chest, feeling her own heartbeat. "I saw people crying," she whispered. 5 words. I nodded once. "They felt the gap." 4 words. Carlos's eyes widened. "The gap?" 2 words. I kept my voice calm, almost clinical. "When you expect a boom and you get silence." 10 words. Carlos's jaw tightened. "That's manipulation," he said. 2 words that were more fear than accusation. I looked at him. "That's memory." 2 words. He opened his mouth, then closed it. He didn't know how to argue with memory without sounding like a man arguing with the dead. My mother whispered, "Did you do it for them?" 5 words. I didn't correct her. I didn't romanticize it. "I did it because I'm still here," I said. 9 words. Her eyes filled, and she looked away quickly, ashamed of tears in a hallway. Carlos exhaled hard, as if the air in the house had become too heavy to breathe. "City said no memorial," he insisted, voice tight. "We signed." 5 words. I nodded once. "We signed no speeches." 4 words. Carlos blinked. "That's not..." 3 words. "It is," I said. 2 words. Silence settled in the house, thick and familiar. My mother's scarf brushed her chin as she swallowed. The clock kept ticking. No fireworks now. Only the small domestic sounds that always returned after collective joy. Carlos's phone buzzed in his hand. He looked down, and the screen's glow turned his face pale. "Oh no," he whispered. 2 words. He shoved the phone toward me, a video, shaky, vertical, of the sky's slow fall sparks. The caption read, "Why did it feel like a funeral?" Comments poured underneath. I got chills. My granddad stood up and saluted. That pause, it wasn't a mistake. Does anyone know what it meant? Carlos's finger scrolled too fast, panicked. It's everywhere, he said. 3 words. I handed the phone back without reacting. People noticed. 2 words. My mother's voice trembled. Is it bad? 3 words. I shook my head once. It's honest. 2 words. Carlos stared at me like honesty was a liability form he couldn't file. The board, our partners, City Hall will call, he said. 10 words. I won't answer, I said. 3 words. He flinched. You have to. 3 words. I kept my tone steady. I don't. 2 words. My mother's lips trembled. Lena, please, she whispered. No trouble. 4 words. I looked at her gently. Trouble isn't grief. 3 words. She closed her eyes, a small wince, like the sentence was too sharp for her peacekeeping heart. Carlos's shoulders slumped. You could have told me, he said. 4 words. I nodded once. You would have stopped me. 4 words. He didn't deny it. That was his answer. The house fell quiet again. Outside, somewhere in town, a distant car horn sounded. Late celebration still leaking into the night. Inside, the silence felt cleaner than any cheer. I went to my room and shut the door. No dramatic slam, just a click. A boundary. Morning came gray and thin, the kind of winter daylight that looked like it had been diluted. My phone buzzed on the nightstand before I'd even swung my legs off the bed. Unknown numbers, messages, links. A local news push alert. New Year fireworks leave town in tears. Unplanned tribute. I didn't open it. I sat on the edge of the bed and listened to the house breathe. Pipes ticking. My mother moving quietly in the kitchen. The faint scrape of a chair. The smell of coffee seeped under my door. My phone buzzed again. Carlos this time. City manager wants a call. ASAP. I stared at it until the screen dimmed. Then I set the phone face down. Silence was a choice. I dressed and drove to the hill, not because I wanted to watch the aftermath, because I needed to see the place where meaning had been planted. The hill looked different in daylight, less dramatic, more practical. Racks were being dismantled. Spent tubes lay stacked like exhausted bones. The ground was littered with tiny paper fragments and gray ash that the wind pushed around in soft scrapes. A tech in a sky-bright jacket glanced up when my truck pulled in. He looked tired, not angry. You're the sponsor, lady, he said. 4 words. I'm the oversight, I replied. 3 words. He nodded, then jerked his chin toward the far edge of the clearing. People already came. 4 words. I followed his gaze. At the base of the main launch platform, someone had placed flowers, fresh bright against cold metal. White lilies and red carnations, their stems wrapped in damp paper towels. Beside them sat a small glass candle jar, unlit in the wind. Light, waiting to become light. I walked closer, boots crunching on frozen grass. The air smelled like damp soil and spent powder. My breath came out in slow fog. A woman stood there with her back to me, coat too thin for the cold, and shoulders squared like she was holding herself upright on purpose. Her hair was streaked with gray, pulled into a clip. Her hands were bare, red from winter. She didn't turn when I approached. She didn't need to. You did that, she said quietly. 3 words, not a question. I stopped a respectful distance away. I did. 2 words. The woman nodded once, as if confirmation was something she needed for her body, not her mind. The wind lifted the corner of her scarf and dropped it again. My son was EOD, she said. 4 words. My throat tightened. I kept my voice low. I'm sorry. 2 words. The words I'd said too many times and never found enough. She looked down at the flowers. Don't be, she said. 2 words, sharp, controlled. Then she added softer. Just, thank you. 3 words. I stared at the candle jar. The glass was cold, slightly fogged from her breath. I didn't light it. The wind would have killed it anyway. But the presence of it, unlit, felt like the right kind of truth. She finally turned her head enough for me to see her profile. Her eyes were swollen, but her jaw was set. I heard that pause, she said. 4 words. I nodded. It was for them. 4 words. Her lips trembled once. People don't pause for them anymore, she whispered. 7 words. I felt the sting behind my eyes and refused to let it become performance. They did last night, I said. 4 words. She inhaled shakily. The smell of spent powder seemed to hit her, because she flinched like memory had teeth. Then she steadied herself again. What was the number? She asked. 4 words. I didn't pretend not to understand. 6. 1 word. Her shoulders dropped as if the number had weight. 6, she repeated, almost to herself. 1 word, carrying a whole cemetery. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. The edges were worn soft. She didn't show it to me, but I saw enough. A printed photo, creased. A young man in uniform, smiling like he didn't know what time would do. I came because my niece sent me a video, she said. 10 words. I nodded. I'm not speaking publicly. 5 words. She looked at me with a strange, grateful respect. Good, she said. 1 word. She placed her palm briefly on the metal edge of the platform, cold, hard, assez, and whispered something I couldn't hear. A name, maybe? A prayer? A private code? Then she picked up the candle jar and set it closer to the flowers, sheltering it slightly from wind with her body, even though it wasn't lit. She didn't ask me to explain. She didn't ask me to justify. She simply stood there a moment longer, letting silence do what speeches couldn't. When she finally stepped away, she left the flowers behind like a quiet flag no one could ban. By noon, the town had changed in small, unmistakable ways. I drove through Main Street and saw it. Flags lowered without an official order, hanging heavy in cold air. Not every building, not every pole. Enough to make it real. Outside the diner, someone had taped a handwritten note to the window. For those we lost, thank you. No names, no politics. Just acknowledgement. At a stoplight, my phone buzzed again. Carlos. I didn't answer. Another buzz. City Hall. I didn't answer. I passed the town square, now empty except for litter and a few workers folding barricades. The big countdown screen was dark, reflecting the pale sky like a dead mirror. And still, in that empty space, I could almost hear last night's slow clap. Measured, collective, like the town's heartbeat had learned a new rhythm. I pulled into a quiet lot and turned off the engine. The car cabin went still. No heater hum, no radio. Just my breathing and the faint tick of cooling metal. I opened my notes app, not to write a statement, to write a list. 6 names, 6 sequences, 6 pauses. I didn't type them for anyone else. I typed them so the year couldn't steal them from me with noise. Then I looked out at the gray winter sky and felt the familiar truth settle. Calm. Surgical. The world would ask what it meant. I would not translate it, because remembrance wasn't content, it was duty. And that night, when the square filled again with questions and cameras and people hungry to label what they'd felt, I already knew where I would be. Alone, under an open sky, counting the light the way I always had. The hill looked smaller in the late afternoon, stripped of night magic and crowd noise in daylight. It was just frozen grass, flattened tire tracks, and a scatter of gray paper shreds that the wind pushed around like it couldn't decide where the past belonged. I parked at the edge of the clearing and killed the engine. Silence rushed in. Not the awkward kind from a dinner table, not the heavy kind from a memorial chapel. This was open silence, winter-wide, honest. The air smelled faintly of spent powder and damp soil, and every breath felt like it scraped something clean inside my chest. The racks were gone now. Sky Bright had dismantled the platform, hauled away tubes, swept what they could. What remained were the small truths cleanup never fully erased. Ash caught in grass, a kinked zip tie, a strip of fuse casing curled like a dead vine. An unlit fuse lay near a crushed patch of ground, black and intact, as if it had been spared by accident. I stared at it for a long moment. Unlit. That was always the part people didn't respect. The moment before. The moment full of possibility, when everything looked harmless if you didn't understand what it carried. I walked over, boots crunching lightly. The fuse casing felt stiff when I picked it up, cold as a nail. I rolled it once between my gloved fingers, then slipped it into my pocket like a reminder I didn't need the town to approve. I came here alone on purpose. Not because I wanted solitude as punishment, because remembrance didn't require an audience, it required accuracy. I crossed to the spot where the main platform had been. The grass was pressed flat, the soil darkened. Someone had left flowers there the morning after, white lilies and red carnations. But the wind had knocked one stem loose, a petal lay in the dirt bright against gray. I didn't touch it. I just stood above it, letting my breath fog in and out, letting the field be what it was. Quiet ground beneath a sky that had spoken last night. In my pocket, my phone buzzed. Once, then again. I didn't take it out. I didn't need to see the names on the screen to know who they were. Carlos, the city manager, someone from local news, maybe even an old army contact forwarding a link with a single line. You did that? People wanted to label what they'd felt. People always did. Labels made emotion manageable. I didn't want it manageable. I wanted it true. I walked farther out, away from the platform marks, until the only sound was wind pressing through bare branches. The town sat below the hill, busy and small, people buying groceries, posting videos, arguing in comments about whether the show had been appropriate, beautiful, too heavy, exactly what we needed. I didn't read any of it. I sat on a low rock and took out a small notebook I kept in my truck. Not a journal, not poetry, just a place for things I refused to lose. The paper smelled faintly of cardboard. My pen clicked once, loud in the open air. I didn't write a statement. I wrote a count. Aurora 1, 1 pause. Cascade 2, 2 stagger. Skyline. 3, low horizon hold. Ember 4, 1 slow fall. Night rain, 1 long gap. Last star 6, 6 count silence. I read the lines back to myself and felt my chest tighten in a way that wasn't pain. It was alignment, light, silence, pattern. That was all it was. That was all it needed to be. I turned the page and wrote 6 names, 1 per line, no rank, no story, no explanation that would make them palatable for strangers. The wind tugged the paper edge as I wrote, and I pressed my palm lightly against it to keep it from lifting, like holding down something that wanted to fly away. When I finished, I didn't stare at the ink like it could resurrect anyone. I whispered them, softly, clearly. The way you read coordinates into a radio when the world was loud and someone needed you to be precise. The names left my mouth and disappeared into the cold air. The field didn't answer. It didn't need to. That was the point of doing it here. No applause. No debate. No performance. Just truth spoken into open space. Mini turn. A car door slammed behind me, farther back near the parking edge. I didn't jump. I didn't turn fast. I just listened first. Footsteps approached slowly, careful on frozen grass. The sound was lighter than Carlos's. Smaller. My mother. I turned my head and saw her walking toward me in her thick scarf, hands tucked into her coat pockets. Her cheeks were pink from cold, her eyes looked tired, but steadier than they'd been the night before. She stopped a few feet away like she wasn't sure she had permission to step into my quiet. "Lena," she said. 1 word, no warning in it this time. I held my notebook closed with my thumb. "Mom." 1 word. She glanced at the platform scar in the ground, then at the empty sky, then at me. "They're calling Carlos," she said softly. 3 words that meant, the world is trying to turn this into trouble. I nodded once. "I know." 2 words. Her mouth tightened. "He's scared." 2 words. I didn't argue. "He avoids discomfort." 3 words. A fact, not an insult. My mother's breath fogged in front of her face. She looked at her own hands like she was deciding whether to reach for me, then didn't. She was learning, slowly. I watched the videos, she admitted. 4 words. I kept my gaze steady. And? 1 word. Her eyes filled, but she didn't hide it. I heard the pause, she whispered. 4 words. I nodded once. That was the point. 4 words. My mother swallowed, throat working hard. People were quiet, she said, in a square full of people. 10 words, awe and fear braided. They didn't know why, she added. 4 words. I said it gently. Bodies understand rhythm. 3 words. She blinked like that sentence landed somewhere new inside her. Then she looked at me, not at my uniform, not at my rank, but at my face. Did you do it for them? 5 words, the same question as before, but softer now. I shook my head. I did it for the missing. 6 words. My mother's lips trembled. She nodded slowly, like she could finally see the shape of what I carried without needing it to be explained in dramatic stories. I'm sorry, she said. 2 words. I didn't make her repeat it. I didn't collect it. I'm not angry, I said. 3 words. She flinched anyway, because mothers heard anger even when it wasn't there. Then what are you? 4 words. I looked out at the empty field, the platform scar, the pale winter sky. I'm responsible, I said. 2 words. That answer settled between us like something solid. My mother exhaled shakily, then reached into her pocket and pulled out a small object. One of the paper wristbands from the town event still looped, printed with Happy New Year in glittery font. She held it out like she didn't know why she'd brought it. I wore this last night, she said. 4 words. I stared at it, then at her face. She swallowed and continued, voice barely there. I felt guilty for cheering. 6 words. I kept my tone calm. You weren't cheering for death. 5 words. She blinked hard. But I was cheering. 3 words. I nodded once. And then you paused. 5 words. That was what mattered. Not perfection, not purity. The pause. My mother's shoulders shook once. She looked down at the wristband and whispered, How many? 2 words. I didn't pretend not to understand. 6, I said. 1 word. Her eyes closed briefly. When she opened them, she looked older and braver. Do you say their names? 5 words. I glanced down at my notebook under my palm. Yes. 1 word. She hesitated, then asked, May I hear? 3 words. Not entitlement. Request. I didn't give a speech. I didn't turn it into a lesson. I simply opened the notebook and held it angled so she could see the lines. She read silently, lips moving without sound. The wind tugged her scarf. The light was thin, honest. When she finished, she didn't ask questions. She didn't try to turn names into a story she could control. She just stood there beside me in the cold and let silence do its work. After a long moment, she said very softly, Your family wanted you to forget. 7 words, half confession. I shook my head. They wanted it to stay comfortable. 6 words. My mother nodded once, accepting the difference. And you couldn't. 3 words. I wouldn't, I corrected gently. 2 words. She looked up at the pale sky. The town won't forget now, she said. 7 words, wonder and fear. I didn't claim that victory. Maybe they will, I said. But the pause happened. 9 words. That was enough. My phone buzzed again, deep in my pocket. I didn't look. I didn't need to. My mother glanced at my coat, then back at my face. Will you get in trouble? 5 words, the old fear trying to return. I met her eyes. I can live with that. 5 words. Her throat tightened. She nodded once like she hated the answer and respected it. I closed the notebook. I stood up from the rock, joints stiff from cold, and faced the field again. The platform scar sat quiet. The wind moved over it like breath. The sky above was empty, no bursts, no color, just light diluted by winter cloud. I whispered the names again, softer this time for myself. Then I put the notebook away. I didn't need the town to call it a tribute. I didn't need City Hall to approve meaning. I just needed the dead to remain present in the only place I could control, my remembering. As I walked back toward my truck, my mother stayed behind for a moment, standing at the platform scar as if she was learning how to pause on purpose. I didn't rush her. I didn't look back. Some lessons had to arrive in silence. At the driver's door, I stopped and looked once at the wide gray sky. The same sky that had held my code, my pauses, my six-count breath. Then I said the only line that felt honest enough to carry the year forward. We didn't survive to celebrate. We survived to remember.